In the second chapter. We are about to start the second chapter. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Bismillah.
Okay. So, in last class we discussed about what are the external financial statements, like balance sheet, income statement. We discussed about cash flows and all. Now we are going to discuss about the major items in your balance sheet, like accounts receivable, then inventory, then how to recognize the inventory, measure the inventory. Those things we will discuss here. Here. The chapter itself, measurement, valuation, and disclosure of assets, which is short-term items. That means current assets. Accounts receivable. When we say accounts receivable, it's actually the trade receivables of the company. It might have other receivables like lending to employees. That doesn't fall under the accounts receivable category. Accounts receivable means it's actually trade receivables, business receivables. So accounts receivables are amounts owed to an entity by its customers resulting from credit sales in the ordinary course of business that are due in customary trade terms. That means it should have a normal business trade terms, like how many days of credit period, if it is not fulfilled within a particular date, how much is the interest charge you are going to pay. Yeah, you are supposed to collect from the customers and all. And all other receivables are non-trade receivables. Then the recording of a receivable uh, which often coincide with the revenue recognition is consistent with the accrual method of accounting. So when you do the revenue recognition, you are supposed to record your receivables also, right? The receivables should be separated into current and non-current portions. Most of the entities accounts receivable are classified as current assets because they are expected to be collected within 1 year or the entity's normal operating cycle. Okay. So what happens there is sometimes your receivables may not be collectible in 1 year, or sometimes you provide your customers with an additional facility that they can pay in 2-3 months. So when that becomes a non-current receivable. Okay. So current accounts receivables are reported in the balance sheet at the net realizable value, that is net of allowance for credit losses, allowance for sales returns and billing adjustments. So allowance for credit losses means provision for bad debts, or we call it as provision for uncollectibles or allowance for uncollectibles. Okay. Then allowance for sales return, that means provision for sales return. So after, when we say accounts receivable, that means that is a net figure. Okay. Then non-current receivables are measured at net present value of the future cash flows expected to be collected. Like for example, net present value means the money which you are receiving today is more worthier than the money which you are receiving tomorrow. That means day by day the value of the money decreases. So that we calculate of the present value. We call it as present value. That, for example, you are going to receive next year $100,000. So you need to know what is the value of this 100,000 today. Today's that 100,000 value will be $96,000 or $95,000. Clear. So if you are going to get receivables in a future date, you will take the net present value of the future cash flows. Then the principal measurement issue for accounts receivable is the estimation of the allowance for credit losses and the calculation of credit loss expense for the period. So when you talk about the accounts receivable, the main issue we are facing is the provision for bad debt or allowance for credit losses. How much should be the allowance? How much should be the provision for bad debt we should keep? And if there is a real bad debt happen, how we are going to record it? These are the main concerns which you will see when you do the accounts receivable. So, according to GAAP, or for example, when you have a bad debt, when does you receive a bad debt? You say face a bad debt. First, you sell something to some customer. Later on, and you keep it as an account receivable in your books of account. Then later on, 6 months, 7 months, even 1 year, 1.5 year, you try to collect the money back. Literally, you will know that that person flew away or he became bankrupt. So now you have to record your bad debt. So you're in a second year. not in the same year which you sold. So there is always a concept called matching principle, right? Your revenue should be matching with your expense, and your expense should be matching with your revenue. So now you are going to record a bad debt in your pre-idle account after 2 years or 3 years. So this expense will not match with your revenue. So this is one serious issue. Matching concept is there. So what to avoid that, we are providing provision for bad debt. When you provide an allowance for bad debt, this account will be there in the balance sheet. Whatever bad debt you are having, you remove that amount from the accounts receivable and you charge to your provision for bad debt or allowance for credit losses. Clear? Then direct write-off method means when you have a bad debt, you will write off. That is the direct write-off method. That means you will directly debit that expense to your income statement. So what happens? The matching concept will be affected. This is not permitted under GAAP. GAAP, even IFRS or US GAAP doesn't permit this. So, but this method is accepted by for tax purposes. That means income tax, right? Because for the government, they want to collect maximum taxes. For example, as a businessman, I decide because the provision for bad debt, how much percentage I should keep as provision, it is the management's discretion. There is no law, no GAAP rule specifying how much is the percentage. Why? Because it depends upon the business to business or industry to industry. So, for example, if I want to evade tax or reduce my tax, I keep 15% as my provision for bad debt. Okay, what will I do? What will the government do? So, government can't take this. So they say, if you have a bad debt, you claim it. We will have. So that comes as a direct write-off method, which is acceptable to tax purpose, not for US GAAP. Clear? Next, we are going to discuss about elements for customers' right of sales return. So the right of sales return, when there is a sales return, how we are going to record it. Sorry, when a right of return exists, an entity may recognize revenue from a sale of goods at the same time, the time of the sales only, if the amount of future returns can be reasonably estimated. A provision must be made for the return of merchandise because of product defects, customer dissatisfaction, etc. To be consistent with matching principle, the revenue from the sale of goods and the expenses for the estimated sales return must be recognized in the same date. So, accordingly, an allowance for sales return should be established. So, whenever we say, for example, when you are into manufacturing, you might know how much percentage of your goods will be coming as damage from the customer. So, when you record the sale itself, you will record the provision for credit for sales. Clear? No, provision for returns. Okay, sales return. So, for example, here a company has $500,000 as sales of July, its first month of operation. Management estimates that total return will be 1% of sales. So, what you'll do when you record the sales, cash or AR account debited to sales 500,000, and you will provide an expense that is sales return account debited to allowance for sales returns. So, allowance for sales return is a contra asset account. Sorry. Allowance for sales return is a contra asset account and sales return is a contra revenue account. So what do you mean by contra revenue? Any idea about that? Contra revenue means, yeah, come on.
It will show on the income statement. Revenue minus the sales returns.
Yes. The revenue side, it will show as a minus figure. Clear? In the inside line, not in the outside line. Okay. So sales we will have, then we will have minus sales return, then you will have the net sales outside. So that's what the contra revenue. That means you record something in a negative symbol in any account, we say it as contra account. So when you say about contra asset, that means in the accounts receivable AR, you will show minus allowance for sales return. Then you will take the net AR. Same way when you talk about accumulated depreciation. Accumulated depreciation is a contra asset account. Okay, even though it is a credit balance account, we call it as contra asset account. So when you for the examination, they will not ask you whether it is a liability or asset. They will ask, for example, they will give you, as a simple example, they will give allowance for sales return. They will give you four options: asset account, contra asset account, contra liability account, contra or what we say, revenue account. So from this, you have to select which it is. You should select contra asset account. Yeah. There. Next comes the allowance method, which is required under the GAAP. So here, the allowance method attempts to match credit loss expense with the related revenue. This method is required under GAAP. The periodic record, when you record the allowance provision for bad debt, your entry will be credit losses expense account up to allowance for credit losses. Clear? In this, credit loss expenses will hit your income statement, and allowance for credit losses will hit your balance sheet, which is a contra asset account. Okay, then a specific accounts receivable are written off, they are charged to the allowance account. Like for example, this year you made some sale and you provided a provision for bad debt. That means allowance for credit losses. And next year, that particular customer became bad debt. Okay, so now you have to write off that from the receivables. You should not show that amount because you know it is not a collectible amount. It is an uncollectible amount. So you have to remove. So you will remove that amount from the AR. That is, you will credit it. So where you will debit? If you were not following the allowance method, the debit would have been the income statement. That credit loss expense which will hit your income statement. Now you have an allowance method. So whatever write-off you are doing, it will not affect your income statement. Clear? It will allowance for credit losses will be affected. Clear? Then, thus the write-off of a particular amount has no effect on expenses. Okay, a write-off does not affect the carrying amount of the net uh, accounts receivable balance because the reduction of gross accounts receivable and the allowance are the same. Clear? Even though it doesn't affect your balance sheet also. Then in the balance sheet, the carrying amount of accounts receivable is reported as net amount expected to be collected. That is gross accounts receivable minus allowance for credit losses. That is carrying amount of the accounts receivable. Then under the allowance method, the two approaches to calculating the amount charged to credit loss expenses are income statement approach and balance sheet approach. So income statement approach means we calculate the provision on the basis of the percentage of sales. And balance sheet approach means we take a percentage of the accounts receivable. Sorry, income statement approach. So when you say percentage of sales, that's actually the percentage of sales, percentage of the credit sales. Okay, so income statement approach or percentage of sales method. Under the income statement approach, the entity estimates the periodic credit losses expense as a percentage of sales on credit. The journal entry is credit loss expense account up to the allowance for credit losses. Then the ending balance of the allowance for credit losses is determined after all the activities in the allowance account is recorded during the period. Okay. So whatever the method here, whatever the sales, credit sales, that percentage will be your balance in your allowance for bad debts. Okay. So here we have an example. Midberg company has the following unadjusted account balances of the year. That is cash 85,000, AR 100,000, allowance for credit losses 2,000, and sales on credit is 500,000. Based on its experience, Midberg expects credit losses to an average of 2% of credit sales. So how much should be your credit loss expense? 500,000 into 2%. That means 10,000 will be your expense, and 10,000 you will hit your balance sheet also. That is credit loss expense 10,000 and allowance for credit losses 10,000. So now you had already 2,000 in your allowance for credit losses. Now it will be 12,000 as a allowance for credit losses, and your net accounts receivable will be 88,000. Okay. Next one is the balance sheet approach. That is a percentage of receivables method. So under this approach, the ending balance of the allowance for credit losses is a percentage of the ending balance of accounts receivable. Credit loss expense reflects the adjustment of the allowance to its correct ending balances. Here, same scenario we are going to take here also. Under the data from the last question, assume that based on Winberg's experience, 6% of the accounts receivable are determined to be uncollectible. That means always you should have a 6% of your AR as your credit loss expense. Okay. So here, thus the ending balance of the allowance for credit loss is 6,000. That is 100,000 is the AR, which you have, 6% is your credit losses. So you already had 4,000 as your opening balance, right? So current year provision will be 4,000. Got it? So credit loss expenses, account debt to allowance for losses 4,000. So you will have a net accounts receivable 94,000. Okay. Then I hope you all might have created aging schedule, but that aging schedule which you are using in your office is different. You are preparing on the basis of your customer, right? Okay, you are preparing on the, see here, one issue is there. When you take the 2% of your accounts receivable, the problem is that you're charging all your customers with 6%. Some may be only received and credit today. For them also you are providing 6%. Out of this 100,000, 10,000 of today's sales, credit sales. For that also you are providing 6%. And someone is as a AR for the last 2 years, for him also you are providing only 6%. So this is not a scientific approach. So we will have a scientific, more specific approach, that is the balance sheet approach with aging schedule. Okay. So here the aging schedule is based on the days. Normally when the organizations which we prepare the aging is based on the customer wise. We will have the customer names here, amount outstanding for all the period. Here, but we take is on the basis of the dollar value, like $0 to $100 bills, invoices, for example. There is a $50 invoices altogether. There is 30 to 60 days, you have $200. Okay. So same way, the total AR will be 5,400. In that, all the bills will be 10, 15, 90, 80, those bills, those invoices. The same way, you will have on the basis of the balance range here, and you will classify on the days, 30 days, 60, 90, and over 90 days. So which one is more riskier? Which amount out of the 71, 18, and 10,000 and 1,000, which is more riskier? The 90 days, right? If we spending for 90 days, there is lesser hope to collect. So what we will do, we will give a percentage, higher percentage, higher probability of non-collecting. That is, for example, here, this is all management's discretion. Management can decide how much percent they can take. So for the 90%, they took 20%, and the latest sales, they gave only 2%. So this way they calculate the ending allowance, 5,280. In this case, your ending allowance should be 5,280. Out of this, you have an operating balance of 2,000, right? So current year expense will be 3,280. Clear? Correct? Now, what happens when one of your customer whom you thought he became bankrupt, he will not pay you, you write it off, right? When you write off, your entry is like allowance for credit losses account up to AR. You removed him from the AR account. But what happens later on? He came and paid them. So where we will take? We will receive cash and we will credit that amount to the allowance for credit losses. Clear? So occasionally a customer pays on the account amount previously write off, and they will be cash to allowance for credit losses. Then credit loss expense is not affected when an account receivable is written off, or when an amount previously written off becomes collectible. So our expenses or revenue is not affected. Like the following illustration, say like a reconciliation of the beginning and ending balance of the gross accounts receivables. So how come a accounts receivable can change? Because of the credit sales during the period, it will increase minus cash collected from the credit sales during the period minus AR written off during the period. So you will get the ending accounts receivables. Then for the balance sheet, you have two accounts, right? One is AR account and one is provision, allowance for credit losses. So for the allowance for credit losses, also what happens? You have adjustment, right? Opening allowances plus credit loss expenses for the current period minus any write-offs you have, real write-offs you have, you will minus plus any collections you received of the previous year. Clear? Another income statement approach, credit loss expenses percentage of the sales on credit, right? And the ending balance of allowance is calculated using the equation above. And under the balance sheet approach, the ending balance of the allowance is a percentage of the ending balance of accounts receivable, and the credit loss expenses is calculated using the equation above. Clear? Then comes factoring of accounts receivable. Have you heard about factoring? For example, have you ever made your Itaselat or do bills delay? You did. So someone called you for collection, and maybe even after you paid, also they will call you, right? But because they are not from Itaselat or do, they are actually collection agents, collection company. So they are actually factors. They are third party who is assuming the responsibility of collection. So normally what happens when, for example, I'm a factor and you have few receivables. I will tell you, okay, for example, your outstanding is 100,000. So I will tell you, okay, I will collect this 100,000 for you. So you should give me a margin out of this, and I will pay you this 100,000 in advance. You sold it, you sold your product to your customers today only. 30 days is the credit you are giving. So what happens? I'm giving you in advance this 100,000. So I will deduct an interest for this 30 days. In addition to that, I take a percentage of profit out of this. Like for example, I will take 5,000 as my commission for collection, and the interest also I will take, and I will keep a reserve for the non-collectibles. Okay. Once I collect the full amount, I will pay you this percentage also. Okay. So factoring is a transfer of receivables to a third party whom we call as a factor, who assumes the responsibility of collection. Okay. The factoring discounts receivables on non-recourse notification basis. Thus, payments by the debtors on the transferred assets are made to the factor. If the transferor surrenders control, the transaction is a sale. For example, when you sell your receivables to me, and I take the responsibility, and you doesn't take the responsibility. Yeah, that means you are selling your receivables to me. Whatever I collect, it is mine. Okay. So that if a sale is with recourse, the transferee, that means the credit agency assumes the risk and receives the reward of collection. That means without recourse means I cannot come back to you that saying that okay, your customer didn't pay me, you pay me. I can't say that. There is a without recourse, sale without recourse. So this sale is final and the seller has no further liability to the transferee. Accordingly, the receivables are no longer reported on the seller's books. When you sell this to me, you will remove that receivables from your books. Clear. Next one is if a sale is with recourse. The transferor or the seller may be required to make payments to the transferee or to the buyer back receivables in specified circumstances. What are those circumstances? In these circumstances, the transfer might not qualify as a sale. The parties account for the transaction is a secured borrowing with a pledge of non-cash collateral. Okay. Accordingly, the receivables are still on the seller's book, and it must be recognized. It must recognize the liability for the amount of cash received. Clear? As an individual, okay, as a normal customer, as a normal person, are you dealing with factor daily basis? As a normal person, are we all dealing with any factoring agent regularly?
No.
No, right? Okay.
No.
So do you have credit card?
No.
You don't have. Oh, then okay, then you don't have to worry. You don't study this, okay? If in
I don't like credit cards.
okay, you have debit cards.
Yeah, I have.
You swipe your cards in shops.
Yes.
Okay, then what happens is that there is a transaction charge deducted. This card company and the bank which you are providing, they provide this money to the shop because you are not paying in cash. So the facility the shopkeeper is having that rather than giving to you goods on credit, he is giving a 2.5% or 1.5% charges to the credit card company and bank, and he is getting a say. So the service provided by the bank or credit card company is the factory. So what happens? Who takes the responsibility? For example, my card is FAB card. First Abu Dhabi Bank card is I am using. Then if I swipe the card in a shop, then the shopkeeper will receive the money in the same time. But who is taking the responsibility of collection from me? FAB. Okay, so that is what factoring happens. How the factoring happens. Here is an example question. A factor charges a 2% fee plus an interest of 18% on all cash advances to a transfer of accounts receivable. Monthly sales are 100,000 and the factor is advances 90% of the receivables submitted after the deduction of 2% of fees and interest. Okay. So the credit terms are 60 days. What is the cost of the transfer of this agreement? That means as a company, what is your cost? That is what we are going to calculate. Your normal sales is $100,000 and you are providing me, for example, I am a factor and you are asking me to do the factoring for you. And I will charge you 2% my factoring fees and I will charge you 18% interest. And I will deduct 10% as my reserve because if there is any bad debt or uncollectible, I will reduce from that. Or sometimes there is sales return also. I can reduce from that. Okay, so what will I do? I'll take 100,000. Okay, 10% I will keep reserve. Then I will take 2% factoring fee. That is 2% of which amount? The receivables, not the 90,000 which I am paying. Clear? For the 100,000, I will take 2%. So balance 88,000 is what I'm going to pay. For this 88,000, I should get interest for 60 days. And the interest charge I am charging is 18%. So 88,000 into 18% into 60 days interest. Okay, 60 divided by 360. So normally for examination, we take easy for easy calculation, we take 360 days, not 365 days. Okay, sometimes you might get confused, right? Whether it is a leap year or not. To avoid that, we take 360 days. Okay, so when you do the factoring agreement with me, immediately you get 85,000, 360 as cash due. So how much is the difference you have? Like 4,640. But this 4,640 is not your expense, right? No. What about 4,640 is your expense, but actually you are receiving only how much? 85,000, right? Almost 15,000, 14,000 you are not receiving. Out of this, 10,000 is your due from factor. That means it's a reserve. Okay. So your entry will be cash account debtor 85,000 and due from factor 10,000 and loss on sale of receivables 2,000. Then prepaid interest 2,640. Your accounts receivable will be 100,000. You are removing your accounts receivable from the books of accounts. Clear? Okay. The main reason for factoring transactions are as follows. A factor usually receives a high financing fee plus a fee for collection. Furthermore, the factor often operates more efficiently than its clients because of the specialized nature of its service. Because if I am a factoring agent, I don't have any other job. This is my main job. You have other things to do, your main operations, you have to concentrate. So you can give that job to me, I will do the collection. An entity that uses a factor tries to speed up its collection. Also, it can eliminate its credit department and accounts receivable staff. In addition, bad debts are eliminated from the financial statement because you are allowing all your customers. You don't provide credit to any customers. Either you pay cash or you swipe your card. In this case, you will never have a bad debt. Clear? Then, credit card sales are a common form of factoring. The retailer benefits by prompt receipt of cash and avoidance of bad debt and other costs. In return, the credit card company charges a fees. Even you swipe your debit card, also this will be there. Okay, your supplier will lose some money. Okay, then inventories and fundamentals we will continue next class. Okay. Oh, so
Okay. Thank you, Nadeem.
by 7:30, right? Okay, so for you, okay, you guys are ready to sit, then we will continue. Kareem, Asad,
No problem for me.
okay. What about Asad? It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
Inventory fundamentals. So now coming to the inventory part. Inventory means it can be like your raw materials is your inventory, finished goods, work in progress, all comes under the category of inventory. So inventory is the total of tangible personal property held for sale in the ordinary course of business in the form of work in progress process or to be completed and sold in the ordinary course of business or to be kept used by currently in production, producing goods or services for sales. That is the raw materials. What we are talking is raw materials. Here is work in progress, and here is the finished goods inventory. Okay. So inventory does not include long-term assets subject to depreciation. Okay. Then inventories are generally classified as current assets in the financial statements. They are expected to be realized in cash or sold or consumed during the normal operating cycle or the of the business. Long-term assets either subject to depreciation or retirement or returned from regular use and held for sale are not classified as inventories. For example, you have a particular machine or a fixed asset or PPE that you decided not to use it for a few period or not to use it now. You transferred this to your warehouse and you're keeping it with your other inventories. So can we calculate this as inventory? No, because this was a fixed asset. And for example, you kept it apart for sales. Even though you're keeping it for sales because it's your used asset. So you are either going to scrap it or you're going to sell it outside. So still it's a long-term asset. So you can't, it's a depreciable asset. You can't consider as an inventory. Then the inventory of retailer consists of goods purchased to be resold without substantial modification. So when a retailer purchases some products, he never do substantial modification. He might repack it or put it in another packing or something like that. But when a manufacturer purchases it, he undergo production. He do manufacturing. Okay. The inventory of a manufacturer consists of goods to be consumed in production, goods in the process of production, and finished goods. Okay. Then the gross profit of the period is measured and presented in the income statement as the difference between the amount of sales and the amount of cost of goods sold. Sales minus COGS, you will get the gross profit. Then. Cost basis of inventory, initial measurement. When you have the inventory and you're going to measure it for the first time, that means you're recording your purchase. How much value you are supposed to record. Okay. The cost of inventory include all costs, including incurred in bringing the inventory to their existing location and ready to use condition. For example, you purchase few raw materials from US or something. For that, you had to pay freight charges, duties. Duties are not reimbursable, so that's why duty is also part of your cost, and any other charges which you paid for. And you brought these goods to your premises. What happened when the goods reached your warehouse? these goods are not fit to use. So you had to do some work on that to be usable. So those expense, what you spend also will be forming part of the inventory. Clear? That's called the ready to use condition, to make it to the ready to use condition. So the cost of purchase inventory includes the price paid or consideration given to acquire the inventory. That is net of trade discounts, rebates, and other similar items. Okay. Then import duties and other unrecoverable taxes. So that means VAT will not come under the cost because VAT is recoverable. That's why we show it under the current assets. Clear. Then if you purchase some inventory or some products and VAT is not claimable, then you should add that to the cost. Okay, that is an unrecoverable tax. Handling, insurance, freight, and other costs directly attributable to acquiring the finished goods and materials and bringing them to the present location and condition, that means saleable or usable condition, you should add. So the summary will be purchases minus returns and allowances minus purchase discounts plus transportation, you will get your net purchases. Then cost of manufacturing inventory. Cost of manufacturing inventory, that is work in progress, process and finished goods include the cost of direct material used and conversion cost. Conversion cost consists of direct labor cost and manufacturing overhead. Then next comes the inventory accounting system. Okay, in inventory accounting system, for example, if you record your purchase or sale, when you record the purchase or sale itself, you are having an entry in the back end which is hitting your cost of goods sold. Then we can call it as a perpetual inventory system. Or you're having you just do sales and you just do purchase, and the year end you take the inventory calculation. Other than stock taking, you will not know what is your real inventory. Then you are following periodic inventory system. In perpetual inventory system, what happens whenever there is a purchase and whenever there is a sale, and the entry for cost of goods will be passed at the same time when there is a purchase or sales. Clear? So perpetual inventory system, if you are following perpetual inventory system, at any point of time you can get the exact value of your closing stock, and you can get the exact gross profit of the company, cost of goods sold, and all those things. Okay, and one more thing is there. Right, that's it. Then a perpetual inventory system updates inventory accounts after each purchase or sales. This system is generally more suitable for entities that sell relatively expensive and heterogeneous items and require continuous monitoring of inventory and cost of goods sold accounts. Okay, automobile dealers are example, but nowadays this they are saying on the basis of why, because there was no accounting system softwares at the time they formed this inventory system. Now what happens, we have all accounting system softwares, majority of the system software supports this. Okay, when passing the sales, automatically the entry goes and hit. So when you study this, but in practical, yeah, we are using perpetual inventory system. So purchases and other items leading to inventory costing are charged directly to the inventory. Then inventory and cost of goods sold are adjusted as sales occurs. Okay. An advantage of perpetual inventory system is that amount of inventory on hand and cost of goods sold can be determined at any time. Okay, and the thing is that even though you get the correct value of inventory from the system, you do stock taking. Why? Just for checking whether there is any variation. Or for example, you were supposed to invoice the product X and you sold product X, but you built product Y. So what happens when you go there, you will see product Y there, but product X is not there. So this adjustment you have to do. Only for that purpose you do stock taking. Otherwise, perpetual inventory system shows you the correct inventory. Then a disadvantage of the perpetual inventory system is that the bookkeeping is more complex and expensive. A perpetual system is more often used when individual inventory items are of high value because a perpetual system provides better internal control. Okay, then. In a periodic inventory system, inventory and cost of goods sold are updated at specific intervals, such as quarterly or annually, based on the physical count. If you don't take the physical count, you will never know what is your gross profit. Okay. So bookkeeping is simpler under this method. Thus, entities with relatively inexpensive and homogeneous items such as grain dealers that have no need to continuously monitor the inventory and cost of goods sold generally use this system. Under the periodic system, goods bought from the suppliers and other items relating to inventory costs are tracked during the period in a separate temporary account called purchases. Then the beginning inventory balance remains unchanged until the end of the period when the purchase account is closed. The changes in the inventory and cost of goods sold are recorded only at the end of the period based on the physical count. So we'll see the transaction happens in two systems. How does the two systems handle the transactions? So here, entity A, January 1, year 1, inventory cost of consists of 1,000 units with a cost of 5 per unit. The following are the entity is year 2 transactions. Okay, it have an opening stock of 1,000 units costing $5. So sold 600 inventory units for 4,800 in cash, and in May they purchased 250 units for $5 per unit. Okay, at the end of the year, physical count was 650 inventory units. So yeah, entry when in periodic system, it is very simple. When you sell, cash account up to sales. Okay, 4,800 into 4,800. Then when you have a purchase, that is purchase account up to cash. And at the year end, what you have to do, you will take the physical count of the inventory. Okay, and you know what is a beginning inventory, right? You know what is a purchase account. You will close the purchase account, and the difference value is the cost of goods sold. Clear? So that is a periodic system. But in perpetual system, when you do the sales, there is two things happening. One is you record a sale, cash account up to the sales, and you're removing inventory also from your books. Okay, got it. When you remove the inventory, that cost is hitting the cost of goods sold, COGS. And when you purchase, what happened? Inventory account up to cash, not purchase account up to cash. Inventory is hitting. Clear? Next, after the physical count on December 1st, it's not necessary to have a physical count, but we just do for the counter checking, whether the amount matches or not. And you will have a beginning inventory with 5,000 and purchase of inventory during the year 1,250, and the ending inventory will be 3,250. So cost of goods sold 3,000. Clear? Okay, done. The perpetual and periodic system have the same result. However, under the periodic system, the amounts of inventory and cost of goods sold are updated only at the end of the period after the physical count. Clear? Okay, that's fine. Inventory period and physical count. Okay, an annual period and inventory physical count is necessary under both the perpetual and periodic inventory system. The amount of inventory reported in the annual financial statement should be based on a physical count. So under the perpetual system, a physical count helps to detect a misstatement in the records and the theft of inventory. The difference between the physical count and the inventory in the books are recognized in the cost of goods sold account or as a separate line item in the current period income statement. Okay. Under the periodic system, the amount of inventory and cost of goods sold can be determined based only on the result of a physical count. Thus, the amount of cost of goods sold for the period includes both inventory cost of goods sold and inventory shortage and outage, overages. Right. So when you do the physical count, you have to keep few things in mind. That is, sometimes you might have recorded few purchases, but the goods haven't arrived. Maybe because of there is shipment terms. So we will see what are the shipment terms. There is few basic shipment terms that FOB shipping point and FOB destination, and you might have goods in the consignment accounting. I think you might have heard. Means I have an agent who is selling my goods. So when I send some product of mine to you, it is my goods placed in your warehouse. That's it. It is not your goods. So when some auditor comes and audit my warehouse, this goods is not there because it is with my consignor. So here, for physical count to be accurate, the entity must count all items considered to be inventory and eliminate all items that are not. Items to be considered counted as inventory includes the following: that is goods in transit and goods out on consignment. So goods in transit also, all goods in transit we cannot calculate the inventory because there is few shipping terms. That is FOB shipping point, FOB destination. So items in the transit are inventories that on the physical count date are not are not on the entity's premises and are on the way to the desired location and whose legal title is held by the entity. Okay, that is the entity bears the risk of loss and inventory on inventory on transit. The following are the most common shipping terms. That is FOB shipping point. That means FOB shipping point means I am purchasing something from the customer, the supplier. So when he brings the goods to the his port, for example, I am purchasing from US. So the goods arrived at the Houston port. Then that is the shipping point. So from there, my travel agent, for what we say, freight forwarder takes the responsibility of the goods. So now I am going to record my purchase. So if the goods is missed or damaged in the shipment, I am going to be responsible. I will lose my money. So and FOB shipping point, sometimes called FOB factory, legal title and risk of the loss passed to the buyer when the seller delivers the goods to the carrier. The buyer must include the goods in the inventory during the shipping. Even though goods is in the ocean or in the air, I have to record this as my inventory. Next comes the FOB destination. FOB destination means goods and title of the goods will be received to me only when the goods reaches my port or my destination. So the legal title and risk of loss passes to the buyer when the seller delivers the goods to a specified destination. The seller must include the goods in the inventory during the shipping. Clear. Then goods out on consignment. A consignment sale is an arrangement between the owner of goods and the sales agent. The consigned goods are not sold but rather transferred to an agent for possible sale. The consignor records sales only when the goods are sold to a third party by the consignee. Goods on consignment are included in the consignor's inventory at cost. Cost of transporting the goods to the consignee are inventorable cost, not the selling expenses. Like for example, in normal cases, when I transport my goods to the customer, that is a selling expense. But here I am transporting my goods to my consignor. Like just like I am transporting my goods to another warehouse of mine itself. So this is forming part of the inventory cost. Clear, not the selling expense. Okay. Then the consignee never records the consigned goods as an asset. Entity A is December 31st year one. Warehouse inventory physical count result in an amount of inventory of 50,000. Okay. The following are the additional information regarding the entities A's year-end inventory. So there are few transactions during the year. Entity A consigned goods with a total cost of 60,000 to entity B. Okay. The annual statement that was sent by entity B to entity A states that 60% of the consignment goods were sold for 42,000. That means 60,000 is the goods I sent to my consignee. Out of this 60% is he sold. That means balance 40% is with me, with him. That means it's around $24,000 goods is in the consignment with the consignment. Okay, then next that I should add to my physical inventory. Right, when I counted, I have only $50,000 goods. So with that 50,000, I will add this 24,000. Next, with the merchandise costing 40,000 shipped, FOB shipping point from a vendor on December 29, and the goods was received to us on January 4. That means when it is in a FOB shipping point, that means I am the one who is going to take the responsibility of the goods. The 40,000 I should add to the inventory. Next case, the goods billed to a customer on FOB destination. Now we are selling to the customer and it is on FOB destination. When the goods reaches to the customer, only customer will recognize it as a purchase. Then only I can recognize it as a sale. So this 25,000 is the value of the goods. So this 25,000 goods is not with me, but it is in the shipment. But the owner of the goods is still me. So I should add this 25,000 to the inventory which I have. So total 139,000 will be your inventory balance. Clear? Next, inventory estimation. Like what happens sometimes in between the year, you might have a fire in your premises. So you have to calculate your profit, or sometimes for the insurance claim, you need to know how much inventory you have. Because when the fire happens, you don't know what is the inventory value. Inventory got like fire destroyed the inventory. So you need to know what is the inventory. So you normally have your gross profit margin. With that gross profit margin, you will calculate what is the inventory. Okay, so here, an estimate of inventory may be needed when an exact count is not feasible. For example, for interim reporting purpose or when inventory records have been destroyed. The goods gross profit method may be used for inventory estimation even when the inventory may have been stolen or destroyed by fire. So the gross profit we calculate on gross profit divided by sales. You get the gross profit margin. So here, a retailer needs to estimate the ending inventory for quarterly reporting purpose. The firm's best estimate of the gross percentage is the historical rate of 25%. So our sales is 1 million, purchase is 300,000, and beginning inventory is 800,000. So from the beginning inventory, opening inventory plus purchases, you will get what? Goods available for sale. Okay, 1.1 million. From this, what happened? Your sales is 1 million. 25% is your profit, right? So you will reduce your 25% profit. So balance is the cost of goods sold, right? 750,000. 1.1 minus 0.750, you will get 350,000 is the ending inventory. Clear? That comes. Next comes the inventory error. These errors, for example, you might have forgot to record a purchase this year. On 31st December, you received a purchase, you had a purchase, but you forgot to record. What happens this year? Your purchase is understated, your inventory is understated, right? Your current liability is understated because you didn't record your purchase, your current liability is understated. So what happens? Automatically next year, and your profit will be overstated. Why? Because you didn't record this purchase. So automatically these errors, inventory errors, like it's a compensating errors. Next year it will automatically compensate. Next year's profit will be reduced. This year profit is high, but next year profit will be less because you record a purchase there. Here. So here, inventory errors. These errors may have a material effect on current assets, working capital, then cost of goods sold, net income, and equity. Okay. A common error is inappropriate timing of recognition of transactions. A purchase on account is not recorded and goods are not included in the ending inventory. Then cost of goods sold and net income are unaffected, but current assets and current liabilities are understated. If purchases and beginning inventory are properly recorded, but items are excluded from ending inventory, cost of goods sold is overstated. Okay. Net income, inventory, retained earnings, working capital, and the current ratios are understated. So, errors arising from recording transactions in the wrong period may reverse in the subsequent period. If ending inventory is overstated, the overstatement of net income will be offset by the understatement in the following year that results from the overstatement of the beginning inventory. Clear? So here, for example, the first year, what happened? We had an overstatement. Inventory is overstated. Okay, when inventory is overstated, ending inventory is overstated. That means your net profit will be overstated, right? And your cost of goods sold will be understated. This net overstated net profit will be adding to your retained earnings. So your retained earnings will be also overstated. But what happens in the next year? The overstated ending inventory will be your next year's opening inventory. So what happens? Your opening inventory will be overstated. So goods available for sale will be overstated. Your gross profit will be understated. Income will be understated. So ultimately, your return earnings will be understated. So what happens when you come join these 2 years? It will stabilize. Clear? So balance inventory cost flow methods we will discuss in next class. Okay.
Okay. So, Nadeem,
Yes. Kareem, any doubt?